mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about episode 4 of the Hulu series Pam and Tommy, entitled The Master Beta. This is the kind of title where if I had looked at like the episode titles for the season prior to the show, I'd probably be like, yeah, I don't need to watch this show. Like, that's the kind of pun that I'm just like, okay, are we going to try to be a little bit mature here? Like I mentioned in the last video for episodes 1, 2, and 3 that I wanted something that explored aspects of this situation that we wouldn't think of on the surface. Because as someone who was a teenager at the time that this tape came out, all it really was about was just like, oh, okay, I'm a teenager and there's a sex tape of a really famous, beautiful woman that's out on the internet. And it was just a set of circumstances that existed. Now, as a 40-year-old, I look at that shit and I'm like, okay, we gotta talk about how like the internet was just kind of becoming a thing. The sex tapes were just kind of becoming a thing. How does this impact a famous woman versus a famous man versus the fact that they're a couple together versus the fact that she's on Baywatch? Like there's so, and most importantly, which the first 3 episodes brought to me, is how you create what happens to the kind of person who steals something like this and puts it out on the internet. Like, how do you get to that place? So there's so many different questions that I had that I thought this show might be able to answer. So if I had looked at the episode titles and had seen one was called The Master Beta, I'd have been like, all right, man, this show's gonna be a joke. I'm not even gonna watch this. But that aside, this episode was fairly interesting. There were kind of like 2 main things going on with this episode. There was kind of like Rand's escape from his consequences. That was kind of a focus. And then the other focus was, I think, the misogyny and sexism that exists as it pertains to sexuality in regard to men versus women. And this episode, I think, did a lot to kind of talk about that. And they kind of like dipped their toe in the water a little bit at the beginning and kind of worked toward a place where they were able to discuss it more openly. So, but I'm going to start with what happens at the beginning of this episode, because it's important, because it kind of starts like what I think is currently like a reparable situation. Like there was a small rift that I think has been, for the most part, kind of repaired by the end of this episode. But I think that throughout the rest of the season, I think it's an 8-episode season. Throughout the rest of the season, I expect that rift to widen a little bit. So Tommy hires a private investigator to figure out how the tape got out. This is after he discovers, I had forgotten that he didn't even know the tape was out yet. So he drops an ultrasound picture on the floor. It says he needs to go put it away, put it somewhere safe. He goes to put it in the safe, realizes the safe is gone. He runs off the list of what was in the safe. And then Pamela mentions, our tape is in there. And I think this is kind of even the start of the rift, because it wasn't even important enough for him that he didn't even remember it was in there. He's talking about guns and watches and shit like that. He doesn't remember that there was a sex tape in there, and that Pamela immediately does. And already in my notes, I'm like, this is a problem. The fact that like it doesn't even occur to him that that's there. So that kind of gets the ball rolling on the rift. And then later they're talking about it, and Pamela says something like, I feel violated. And she says, don't you? And he was like, he looked confused, like, I feel pissed. And I think that is where it really started to kind of like open up a little bit, because Pamela, again, as a woman, is coming from a place of like, this is embarrassing for me. I'm a famous woman. I'm on Baywatch. There's already a ton of people lusting after me. Now this is going to come out here. I'm going to look like a slut. And meanwhile, you're going to look like a fucking hero. All your guys will be high-fiving you. Everybody's going to look like, oh, Tommy Lee is the best. And this is just terrible. And she feels that violation, like, oh, this is a violation of my privacy. This could ruin my career. This is gonna cast me in a bad light amongst fans. And Tommy's just like, I'm pissed somebody stole from me. It's not about the tape itself. It's about the tape through the lens of how it affects her. Like, he doesn't like seeing her upset about it. But for him, it's not a big deal. He's like, oh, okay, yeah, well, whatever. It's just more about the fact that somebody stole from him. And I think that I like how they progressed throughout the episode with building this rift over the 2 different ways that they look at this problem. And I think that was a good start to it. And then it just continues to progress. So the PI that Tommy decides to hire is asking all the right questions to immediately land on Rand as a top suspect for who stole this tape. And he goes to Rand's house and he knocks on the door. Rand opens it and then he busts in and starts like fighting, beating him up and shit. And I'm like, what a bad decision this was by this PI. Plus this PI looks like he's like 52 years old and shit. Like, he chose the right one. The problem is you never know that. Like, if you're that guy and say you're like a middle-aged 50-something-year-old man, you're not in incredibly great shape or anything like that. You're not incredibly tall. You're not incredibly big. And you go to somebody's crib in L.A. and knock on the door and they open and you bust in and think you're going to start whooping ass. You don't know who's on the other side of that door. He didn't have a gun, nothing. He just bursts in. Yeah, you're lucky that was fucking Seth Rogen or Rand Gauthier or whoever the fuck that guy was. And not fucking, well, I mean, he kind of had, I suppose he had an idea from Rand's porn tapes or whatever, how big he was or whatever like that. Pause. But, you know, that could have been motherfucking Terry Crews behind that door. Or it could have been a motherfucker who sleeps with his gun and has it right there. Like, I just thought that was a bad decision. Like, that's not a good move as a PI to just, blindly knock on somebody's door and burst in. But, yeah. Bad decision by the PI that just so happened to work out because Rand is Rand. But Rand spends the rest of the episode running, and he goes to Milty at some point. Like, he tries to contact him a few times, and he shows up at his house, and Milty immediately kind of freaks out. Like, how did they know about me? Which, you know, Rand doesn't know how they know about him, but we know because the PI just asked around, and it was like, well, they were shopping the tape all over the valley. So, yeah, it easily came out that way. And Milty's, you know, well known, I would imagine, in the porn industry. So what's interesting about this plot line, you know, in this episode, we really just see Randy just kind of running away. Like, he constantly escapes, just narrowly averting getting caught. But what I think is interesting is how it ends. Milty tells him that he's getting a flight to Amsterdam to check on the money. And Rand's like, oh, good. Like, in his mind, like, oh, good. Well, he said it out loud, but he was listening to a message. And I'm sitting here like, you don't realize you about to get robbed, bro? like that to me, I think is going to be another interesting aspect of the Rand character is his naivete. Like, no, to think that, oh, I'll put it on the internet and it'll be impossible for me to be like they built this into his character from the beginning of the show. Cause that's naive. Like, oh, I put like, and maybe it's not naive in 1995, but you know, and looking at it in 2022, it's like, of course that's naive, but maybe in 1995 it wasn't, but to sit here and watch him go like, oh, we can put it on the internet and nobody will ever find us. It's completely anonymous. I'm like, this guy has no fucking idea what he's talking about. And then now he's sitting here listening to Milty say like, oh yeah, I'm just going to go check on the money, man. I'm headed to Amsterdam, make sure everything cool. You're not thinking, especially given the conversation you had earlier, that this guy is about to fucking withdraw all the money and never come back or some shit. Like, you should be suspicious at some point. So we could see things crumbling down around Rand and him kind of being left to vie for this on his own. Like, I don't expect him to see Milty in person at all again, unless Milty is just that egregious or unless I'm wrong and he's not robbing him. But I think he's probably robbing him. So that was where we spent a lot of our time. That was kind of like the B plot. But the A plot was Tommy and Pam working through figuring out who got the tape. But another interesting part of the Rand story that wasn't like a C plot or anything like that, but it's just something like they kind of drop into every episode, is that Rand is still clearly interested in being with his ex. He's not, you know, you have a safe out. If your divorce costs $8,000 and you're broke, you got to save out. I ain't got the money. I ain't got the money. I ain't got the money. But now he's making all this money with the tape. He's paying back the $400 and he goes to pay back the $400 clearly with the intention of hoping that it will help them bond a little bit more. Like, she'll be a little bit more grateful. Like, he's doing this as like, I'm almost paying her to try to win her back. And she looked at that as like, well, if you got $400 out of nowhere, everything's going good for you. You got the $8,000 for the divorce. And you could tell that kind of broke him. And now he's in a place where he can't go back home, which he went back home after he already shouldn't have gone back home. He can't go back home. Milty's gone. He has nowhere else to go. So now he's got to go to her place. And now he's got to go to her place while he doesn't see her very often. She still does porn. He's still into her. She's clearly still not into him. And to a degree, must also be kind of using him, because we had that scene, obviously, in one of the first 3 episodes where she calls him and just to ask him to come fix her toilet. So she's cool with asking him to come by and do the work of a husband. Like, hey, can you come fix my toilet? But she clearly also doesn't want to be with him. So there's a little bit of manipulation there, too. So having them live together, I think, is going to be an interesting thing to watch going forward. So, like I said, I mentioned that the rift between them widens when Pamela says that she's going to be perceived as a slut and Tommy's going to be perceived as a hero. And Tommy goes, it's not like it's something anybody hasn't seen before. And she kicks him out. And that I think is the start of kind of like what I expect, or not expect, but consider a possibility of them kind of being in like a back and forth kind of relationship where they're in it and they're out of it. At that moment, it's like, oh, bam, big, huge fight. Everything's going wrong. But then she loses the baby and they come together over that loss and over their justifiable hatred of the paparazzi coming around at that time. And that's another aspect of this that we don't often see. Like, we see celebrities, yelling at paparazzi, flipping them off, all that kind of stuff. But again, we don't see that. We don't really see it from their perspective or consider what they might have gone through to get them to that point. It's the same thing I've said about Rand. You look at Rand as a guy, like, this guy stole this sex tape and put it out on the internet, like, oh, what a piece of shit. But like, look what this guy was going through. He's got the divorce, he's broke. Tommy's treating him like shit, making him do all these different changes, not paying him for the extra, not paying him at all, keeping his tools, putting a gun to his head. And now you get the bigger picture and you're like, okay, well, this is how a guy gets to a point where he wants revenge, to where he's willing to do something like that. And now this showed us, we can compare that to, you might see a celebrity going off on the paparazzi on TMZ, and we look at that and we go, oh, well, these celebrities, man, like, you kind of signed up for your personal life to be public when you became a celebrity. Why are you freaking out on the paparazzi? That guy's doing his job, yada, yada, yada. But now we see, again, how does a celebrity get to that point? You just got Pam and Tommy just got their sex tape stolen, sold on the internet, and they just lost the baby. And now you got a fucking prick paparazzi guy in your face with a camera. Yeah, you're gonna fucking break his windshield with a golf club. So, like, I like how we kind of get to see a little bit of what makes these people act in ways that we might not understand, or we might misinterpret when we see them on TMZ or whatever. And now we see what goes into that, and their actions don't look as crazy as we think they are. So I've enjoyed that aspect of this show just for that alone. And like I said, I still find everything surrounding Rand to be incredibly interesting. Like, I'm interested in more of what the fallout for him is going to be like from this tape. I'm interested in what's going to happen with him and his ex. And conversely, again, the least interesting aspect of this show is not so much Pam and Tommy collectively, but definitely still Tommy. And I'm sure Sebastian Stan is playing Tommy true to life. But, I mean, this guy's fucking unwatchable at this point. Like, this is the kind of person I could not stand to be around. Loud, obnoxious, over the top, wildly extroverted, in your face, like somebody who you just want to tell, sit the fuck down and get out of my face, chill the fuck out. No one wants this kind of over the top ass energy around them all the time. Well, not no one. I'm introverted, so I qualify as someone like that. Maybe other extroverted people they're feeding off that and they're having a good time. This is the kind of guy, I kick this fucker out of my house. He's so fucking obnoxious. And again, that's probably a reflection of the good performance of Sebastian Stan, that he's probably playing Tommy Lee just as Tommy Lee probably was at that time. But man, I can't help but hate this fucking guy. He is so irritating, and not just like in the general rocker way, but in a way that I just feel like, is he like one of the most annoying rock stars of all time? Because I figure some of them got to be kind of chill. Like, yeah, you can do rock, but you don't have to be that fucking guy that like got that obnoxious look at me all the time kind of guy. And oh my God, he's so fucking irritating to watch. So I'm going to close with a couple of thoughts, literally a couple. What was the point of the conversation between Rand and that webcam guy? Like, I thought Rand was going to offer him some sort of deal, like, hey, we should work together. Like, oh, you know about the internet? I know about the internet. But it really just seemed like he was like trying to flex on this guy. Like, yeah, webcams are shit, but I'm doing some next level shit. And the guy gives him the appropriate response, just kind of like, yeah, fuck off. Yeah, that's real great that you got your thing going on. And like, I don't understand what Rand was attempting to achieve with that conversation. Like, it really just seemed like he wanted to flex without actually telling what he was flexing about, and that pointless conversation there. And then there are a couple of interesting names in this episode that you might not have caught if you didn't have the captions on like I did. And it's stupid. It's probably coincidental, maybe. But in that same scene where Rand is talking to the webcam guy, there was a moment where someone says something off screen, and I'm looking at the caption at the time, so I didn't see that his mouth wasn't moving, but Rand was on the screen, and the caption said Seth, and had a line. I'm like, did the caption just fuck up and call him Seth Rogen instead of Rand? But then they go, and the webcam guy was named Seth. So I thought that was interesting, just to for a split second, to see that someone was named Seth on the screen at the same time as Seth Rogen. And it just kind of threw me off for a minute. And I looked at that, I was like, oh, that's a goofy little thing. But I mean, they probably named it. This guy's name was probably actually Seth, that he was a real guy that Rand came across in real life. Maybe we'll see him again. I don't know. But I thought that was interesting. And then the same thing, not the same thing, but something similar happens late. Actually, no, I think this was before. Yeah, when Tommy is talking to the police about what was in the contents of the safe, after they go outside, when Tommy's kind of telling them like, yo, I expect you to handle this kind of quick. And they're like, burglaries, doesn't really get solved too often. And again, one of them says something to Tommy off screen. And anytime that happens, when you have subtitles, it puts the name of that character with a colon by it, so you know who's talking, because you can't see that person because they're showing someone else. And it said Officer Barnes. And I thought that was just really interesting that Sebastian Stan was talking to a character named Barnes on this show. So a couple little interesting things I noticed. But I'm probably going to continue covering this show. I'd like to see how this video does, since I'm going to get it up a little bit earlier in the day than I did for episodes 1, 2, and 3, which kind of, that was a long watch. That was a long day. I'm getting this one up earlier, so I kind of want to see how this video performs. But I figure it'll probably do well enough for me to continue covering this season. And I do have some interest here in how some of these various plot lines play out. So I guess I will see you guys next week for episode 5. Peace.